Hello and welcome back. In this chapter, we will be covering chapter 9, which is going to be sort of an overview of lots of different perspectives that can all be sort of lumped under the header of phenomenological psychology, humanistic psychology, existential psychology, and then the positive aspects of personality. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the phenomenological approach in general, if we're going to kind of group all of these perspectives together and call it this phenomenological approach, it includes certain premises. One is that our own individual perceptions are reality for us. And so no one person's perceptions are any more accurate of reality than anyone else's. This is kind of a little bit of a nod to something that when they said this, they didn't even exist yet, which was cognitive psychology. When this theory was being proposed, there was no such field as cognition. But there was the Gestalt psychologists who were doing work on perception, and the phenomenological psychologists were aware that your previous experiences will help to determine how you make sense of what you're experiencing right now. And because of that, we all are likely to have slightly different perceptions of any given event. And that what is important from this perspective is not what objectively happened or what objectively is going on in the environment, but more important is what the person makes of what's going on out in the environment, how the person internalizes the things that are going on. And so this is kind of a freeing approach in the sense that we don't have, like Freud said, a right way to rear your children so that they don't end up with fixations and things like that. Instead, the phenomenological approach says, what? Part of individuality is a function of having had different experiences in life that then inform our perceptions. And that's really an important, sort of leap forward from Freudian psychology for sure. Definitely from behavioristic psychology, because the behaviorists didn't really talk about, your own interpretation of anything at all. Like they said, that doesn't help them to explain behavior. So the phenomenological approach was introducing something that was pretty new given its time. The phenomenological approach also says that in general, we have free will. This is going to be a little different from the biological approach that says, that your biological predispositions are going to give you certain kinds of behaviors that you do without thinking about it or as a sort of reflex, or the Freudian perspective that says that, you're a function of how you were raised and, the parental malpractice that occurred during that time, or the behaviorists who said you are just a conglomeration of the things that you've been rewarded for and punished for in the past. All of these fields really we're talking about there being some kind of control on your behavior, and not free will, not self-control, but external control of one sort or another. So this approach was very different from those approaches that were their contemporaries by saying, you have free will. You get to decide how to act. And then the final thing that all of these theories agree about is that we as individuals, just humans moving through life, are striving to understand other people, and we're trying to understand things from their perspective. And of course, you're going to be more motivated to understand the perspectives of people that you're close to and that you're in relationships with. But that in general, we don't want to just be like a bull in a china shop, just knocking everybody else over and doing whatever we want and not having any consideration for other people. But instead, we want to understand other people, and we want to be able to interact with them based on, kind of coming to a meeting of the minds about our disparate perceptions. So these are our three main overarching, theories or factors that all of the theories I'm going to talk about in this chapter all to one degree or another display, and that to one degree or another are not displayed in other theories. And that's what makes the phenomenological approach different. So let's start with the phenomenological approach that's known as existentialism. This is a philosophical term. Anybody who's had introductory philosophy has probably heard about existentialism. Basically, existentialism focuses on the idea that all of us are trying to find meaning in life. We're all trying to figure out why we're here, what our purpose is. You know, I always think about, other species who maybe don't have this kind of existential thought. And so they live their lives. And I was having the most interesting conversation the other day about whether, a hawk knows that he's getting old. And, given that he's been a good hunter or whatever his whole life, he's been eating well and he's been healthy, he's been flying around and hunting things. And then does he know he's getting old? Does he know that his end is near? Right? And probably not. Whereas for humans, this is a very human impulse to try and figure out, why are we here? Being aware of our own mortality is part of being human. That is probably one of those things that makes us different from other species, is that we're aware of our own mortality. So under the existential banner, we're going to look at experience, and we're going to say we're concerned about the person's experience of the world, right? Like that's going to be part of their personality, is how they experience the world in their unique way. How they experience others, how they interact with other people, how they view other people, how they stereotype other people, how they sort of normalize their own behaviors and otherize other people's behaviors, these kinds of things. So how do you experience other people? And then experience of our own experience, being able to reflect back on things that we've done, things that we've said, things like that, and actually interpret it through our own lens. Right. I've got highlighted there the word confidence in the picture, that for some people, they look back on their own experience. They're like, wow, overall, I'm pretty good at stuff. I'm pretty well trained, or I'm really smart, or, they say things like that. And that can boost their confidence because they're looking back on their own experiences and saying, in general, I'm doing better than others, or things like that. And so in existentialism, we're going to be focusing on basically the person's experience of all the things around them and inside of themselves. So let's talk about JeanPaul Sartre. I don't speak French, so I'm probably saying his last name wrong. I have never been able to make sense of an RTR structure, so I apologize to those of you who speak French and are like, you butchered that guy's name. One of the things that Sartre offered is this idea of bad faith. He says that you're living in bad faith if you fail to give your own existence meaning. If you can't figure out why you're here, you're living in bad faith. Now, I just want to sort of editorialize a little bit on that. He's talking about adults. He's talking about full-fledged adults. I mean, we all go through a period of time called adolescence when we're trying to figure out who we are, why we're here, what we value. I mean, like that's normal. Anybody who's had lifespan development knows that Erickson talks about, the identity versus role confusion period. And it really is adolescence through the 20s, according to Erickson. It's not just pure adolescence. And so I just want to make sure, in case you're sitting in the middle of, the identity versus role confusion and you're like, oh, that's all I needed was Sartre telling me I'm living in bad faith. That's all I needed piled on top of all the things I'm going through. It's important to realize he's talking about, as you're in your adult life and you're striving and doing your things, if you have not been able to figure out what your purpose is or why life even is, that you're not trying hard enough, basically, is what he's saying. You haven't done enough self-reflection. You haven't done enough deep thinking to really have sorted that out. I'm sorry, it sounds a little judgmental. I didn't write it. He says that authentic existence is when we come to terms with our existential dilemmas. Like, for example, the fact that we are mortal, right? Once we can recognize that time is short and life is short and that kind of thing, we're more likely to be able to live authentically rather than in bad faith. We're going to start to realize that part of the purpose of life is to live it while we have it, right? Other existential dilemmas would be, trying to make sense of our own perceptions versus how somebody else perceived a situation. And, what are we supposed to do with that? Like, which of us is right? Which of us is wrong? Those kinds of things. You have to come to terms with the fact that, honestly, people will see things differently. And that doesn't mean one of you is right and one of you is wrong. It doesn't mean that. And so being able to come to that conclusion is part of living an authentic existence. And then taking responsibility for one's own choices, right? That every day you make a bunch of choices. If you have longer hair, for example, you have to decide, do I want to wear it up or wear it down? If you are the sort of person who wears makeup, you have to decide, am I putting on makeup today or not putting on? It's just really superficial things. Am I going to have cereal for breakfast, or am I going to have eggs for breakfast? I mean, every day you make really superficial decisions. And of course, periodically through our lives, we make some pretty big choices. We make some pretty big decisions. Do I go to college or not go to college? Do I major in this or do I major in that? Do I pursue this career or that career? Do I pursue a relationship with this person or that person? Do I pursue it through digital means or do I pursue it in real life? There's just so many things that all along our lives we have to make decisions about. Am I going to have children or not have children? How many children am I going to have if I fall on the side of children? Do I want to get married or not get married? I mean, these are big choices that in the long run are going to have implications. Every choice you make has implications for your life, for other people that you're connected to. You might be affecting their lives. It's all, like every behavior is a drop on a pool of water that makes ripples that ultimately they begin intersecting and having impacts on everybody else's droplets that made circles. And so we will live authentically when we say, okay, so the choice that I made when I was 17 is now having implications for me when I'm 25, right? Like it was my choice. It wasn't, I wasn't forced into the thing. It would make me feel better if I could say that I was forced into it. But if I acknowledge these are choices that I made, or the behaviors the choices I made leading up to that helped to seal the deal in that particular outcome. If we can look back on our choices, and if we can also, as we're making choices, recognize the implications of those choices and consider other people, right? Consider the impacts that they're going to have on the people around us and things like that. He says that's authentic existence. It's also, I got to tell you what, as an adult, it is sort of how life is, especially if you're an adult who has children who are growing and developing. Every single thing that you do has an impact on their potential development. And it's a lot, right? But he says to live an authentic existence is to acknowledge that these choices that you're making are impacting other people, rather than, to sort of live in denial. Well, I mean, yes, I made a choice and we moved someplace else and you had to start over in school, but I mean, you had to adapt. That's your problem. Like really, that's you. That's on you. It's not on the fact that I moved when you were a junior in high school and you had to start all over. That's what an authentic person will take responsibility for their role in other people's outcomes. Also, the person themselves, the 17-year-old who had to move their junior year, will accept the fact that maybe I pouted for half the year and missed the chance to make new friends. And, they're like, everybody can live more authentically if they'll acknowledge their role in the different outcomes and the different choices that were made. So now these days, as you all know, I'm recording this in April of 2022. I keep mentioning that. People are bandying about the word authentic in lots of different ways. So it's really important. I'm kind of belaboring this point because I want you to understand what Sartre meant by it, not necessarily how it's being used today, because it can be different. It's really important when you're taking classes that you learn the terminology in the context of the class and not necessarily just substitute in the definition that is being used on TikTok or something like that. Because a lot of people talk authoritatively about things that are not necessarily their area of specialty. And, so I just really want you to know that Sartre was really talking about this specific narrow area of authentic existence. He was not talking about other potential topics that I've seen on the internet. I won't go into because I've studied the teaching principles, and one of them is don't tell people the wrong thing and then try to repair it because they'll remember the wrong thing. So I won't tell you what the things I've seen on the internet, but I'll just say that this is what Sartre was talking about. So you can kind of see how him as an example of an existentialist is talking about finding meaning in life. There's a lot of taking responsibility inherent in Sartre's version of existentialism, that it's up to the living person, the liver, to find their own meaning in life. It's not contingent on life to impose meaning for the liver, right? So each of us has our own job to do in life, which is to figure out why I'm here, what am I doing, how have my choices affected myself, how have my choices affected other people, and so on. All right, so that's enough on the field called existentialism. What I'm doing on each of these topics, by the way, is trying to pick out one, maybe two people who sort of exemplify the theory. So we'll go in the next chapter, I mean, in this next segment, we'll talk about humanism, and we will use Rogers as an example of that. So I'll see you in the next segment.